keep the eye as far into the future as you can and set that vision. Keep your eye on that vision and communicate it and over communicate it to your team, because it's that team that's going to get you there.
You're listening to the Bold by Choice podcast with Vashanta Harris and Jim Gunner. Real talk about charter schools, from the boardroom to the classroom. Powered by the National Charter Schools Institute.
Welcome back, friends, to the Bold by Choice podcast, where we help educators transform student outcomes by providing real-world strategies, inspiring stories, and insights that empower you to create high-quality learning environments. Well, I am your friend and colleague, Vashanta Harris.
And I'm Jim Gunner. If you're new here, welcome. If you're coming back, we're glad to have you. Today's episode is all about the moment when a charter school moves from an improved idea on paper to a living, breathing school community. We're diving into authorization and startup. What happens from the time a school receives a legal charter to that very first day when students walk through the doors? We've invited someone who has lived and led through all of that, Mark Weinberg from the National Charter Schools Institute. Mark has been a teacher, a school leader, authorizer, and national advocate for quality. And he's here today to help us unpack this critical chapter in the life cycle of a charter school. Mark, welcome to Bold by Choice.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Vashanta. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I hope I can share some useful insights on this topic. As we gathered this morning, we had a experience that was very similar to school startup, and that's whatever can go wrong will go wrong. So as we talk today, I'll certainly repeat that idea that you've got to plan for the unexpected, and then some other things will happen in addition to the unexpected. So this is a really good example of what school startup is like, our experience as we started up this podcast today.
That's exactly right. What's one of those adages is like, the minute you tell the universe your plan, it says, ha ha, and then say.
Well, I'm hearing the famous philosopher Mike Tyson, your plan's only as good until you get punched in the mouth.
We powered up. We're ready to go. We're making it happen, just like schools do. So there may be some struggles, but you power up and you get back on track.
Hey, Mark, share with the audience a little bit about your background. You've, I met you and you were sleeping on the billboard of a school or something like that.
Well, yeah, my background does include school leadership. Before that, as many school leaders, I was a school teacher and have really been fortunate to have a variety of experiences around schools, including authorizing schools and working with boards. And again, I like to think that some of those experiences I learned from and I wouldn't repeat, or I can definitely share some of those experiences with others.
Well, tell us about this billboard.
So it wasn't a billboard. It was the roof of a 100-plus-year-old school building in Flint, Michigan. And the challenge was to the community to raise money for our first scholarship fund. And my initial thought was that they would pay money to get me back down if I went and camped on the roof with my tent. And you could see me from all around. It was a very tall building. You could see from the highway nearby. And that didn't work out. We weren't raising very much money. So we switched it up and we said, okay, how much would you spend to keep Mr. Weinberg up here? And then the money started pouring in. I think I was up there for 6 days altogether. And just myself, my tent, and my very rudimentary cell phone.
That's a really cool story. Thank you for sharing that. So we're actually really glad to be able to serve as your colleagues and friend as well. But I'd love to invite you to share a little bit more about just who you are from the human side with our listeners.
Sure. As I think about who I am and this topic, and why it has always excited me, and I'm happy to talk about it, is that school startup takes an attitude that I generally talk about as whatever it takes. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a school leader, a teacher, or the head of a board. When it comes to school startup, it's all hands on deck. All those cliches you've heard, it will not succeed unless you just will do whatever it takes. And I think back to one of my school startup experiences, and interestingly, the same experience was repeated, carrying chairs. you're a teacher or a school leader or somehow related to a school, and you don't think you're going to be doing quite as much physical activity as this. But I've spent untold hours moving chairs from one place to another, moving desks, moving school furniture, boxes of books, and that was both as when I was new in education and for many many years after. You still just have to do whatever it takes to get the job done. And I would say that's who I am. When I have something to do, we just do what it takes and let the ego go.
And that's actually a perfect segue because we were talking about like, how do we set the stage? And one of the things I've been thinking about is once a school gets its authorization, it has its actual legal charter. There are steps that schools need to go through to go from like the charter document to actual practice. Can you share with us some of your experiences about what those steps include?
Sure. There are, it sounds very uninspiring, this first step. I stand by it, and I've learned this through experience by not doing it, and then by making sure that each time I'm involved in a school startup, this is done. And that's project planning. Very careful project planning before you start the action. So, and the way I've always said is once that contract is signed and everything is absolutely set to go, you have that date on which the doors will open for the first time for the students, and you backward map from there. And whether your project planning tool is one spreadsheet or it's a sophisticated software platform, start there and backward map, and don't spare time on that, because and bring in all the stakeholders you can in that stage to ensure that you've at least tried to anticipate all the things that are necessary between now and opening day. And the one thing I'll tell you is you won't have anticipated everything, but doing your best at the beginning is critical. Jim and I have a colleague, Brian Carpenter, who taught me I think it's 6 or 7 P's, depending on how salty you want to get, that he learned in the military. The proper prior planning prevents poor performance. And insert your expletive wherever you like, but that proper prior planning is really absolutely critical in school startup.
Mark, we used to have a standard that when we'd open a new school, that people would come visit it in the first few weeks and they'd be like, oh, this must be your 3rd year. Can you talk a little bit about what was behind that?
Yeah, Jim, and it's interesting, as I was thinking about speaking to you this morning about school startup, I had exactly that in mind. I remember it came from you and your leadership of the Center for Charter Schools when we were authorizers. That is what we communicated to new schools, that our expectation, the bar we were setting for them, was that on day one, they would look like they'd been in operation for 3 years. And I can tell you that this past week, I've used that same expectation as I'm working with a school that's in startup phase. So, and it always raises eyebrows when you say that, because they can barely picture that. They're so ingrained in the incredibly complex and sometimes chaotic piece of startup.
Well, that's why we're bold by choice. There's been 8,000 charter schools or more that have opened. We ought to learn, and there's no reason to have first-year chaos repeated.
Exactly. And, my own personal story with that, when we moved to where we did when our kids were young, was an area that actually the closest school was a new charter school. And a very exciting, you read on paper, sounds incredibly exciting new charter school. I was busy starting up a charter school at that point. I didn't have time to go and visit, but my wife did. And as an educator, she walked in and was just horrified by the chaos and said, no way am I sending my kids here. And so it turned out to be a good charter school. It took them a few years to get there, and it still exists. And I would call it an excellent charter school now. But in that first year, we ran scared because of the chaos we saw.
Mark, beyond your own hands-on experience, you've also read the research. What's it say about schools that start poorly?
Sure. It's really clear that, and now we're not talking necessarily about the initial planning phase, but the first year, if performance is poor in the first year and doesn't improve in the first 3 years, and I'm talking about outcomes now, by the time the 5th year comes along, they either in the charter world would be performing at a state where they shouldn't be renewed or should already have been closed down. It's that clear. Schools that start poorly, particularly with academic results, remain poor performers or schools that shouldn't be chartered. Now, that data comes from the bigger And I haven't read that in a while, Jim, but I do recall the research. It comes from the larger world, not just charter schools, but the larger sector. But it is primarily in charters where we think about new schools and schools that have just started up. We don't think about that in the traditional district world. So yes, charters are, it's absolutely critical that they focus on reaching those high performing levels as soon as possible.
So let's deep dive into what we really mean by this, right? So let's like kind of peel the curtains open a little bit. So what is the checklist? So what's the hidden work that schools really need to focus on right after they're authorized so that they do initiate a really strong plan and have a really solid day one?
When I think of the checklist, I think of my project planning tools and I think of the different areas. And that's why it's such an exciting yet complex area. You know, if I look at my own tool, it's got facilities, it has HR policies and procedures. And this is the checklist, Vishanta, operation. And this is just the topics on the checklist:
Mhm.
operations, finances, governance, culture, curriculum and assessment, student enrollment and student enrollment systems, special education and ELLs, external affairs, staff recruiting and onboarding, development, and contracted vendors. And each of those has probably 20 or 30 check boxes under each of those topics. So, you know, we couldn't do the checklist justice today. That's how deep it is, because schools are large, complex organizations with an incredibly important mission to serve and protect children, give them a safe place to learn and grow. So if you want to do that right and you want to do it right on day one, there's a lot of prior planning involved.
Absolutely. And what I love is most authorizers now have taken on this common practice once they have indeed gone through the legal process. And so a new school has its charter. They have what they call the year zero planning. And so that's basically a guide, right? Most authorizers are able to send that guide and send those expectations to those charters in the year zero phase. And so if you're thinking about being a new school, don't fear. These documents and these tools do exist, they're out there. And we just want to kind of unveil a little bit of the secret sauce behind groups that are really successful and how they use them.
Vashanta, that's a good point. And I have seen authorizers who do that, and there's national organizations who've developed those. One of the common terms is pre-opening checklists. And so if your authorizer isn't offering one of those, then there are others out there, and they're great tools to build your project plans around. So the authorizers set their expectations. And again, you know, as Jim and I were talking, sometimes that's a very clear bar as well as a checklist. Others, frankly, don't offer that, and that's where it would be great to go out and get one of those pre-opening checklists and build your own project plan around it.
When you are working with people, is there one or two things that kind of are the most often forgotten about that end up being key?
Yeah, there are a couple that definitely come to mind, and the first one is technology. And particularly some of the people of my generation don't understand quite how critical technology is to every aspect of operating a school these days. And they don't have either the right, they haven't budgeted appropriately for that in the startup phase. They haven't got the right partners on board to set up the systems, because it's connectivity, it's networks within the school, it's student information systems. I was just working with a school. It's going to be starting up this fall. They thought they had a student information system, only to find out that it doesn't work in the particular state they're opening. And now, you know, just before summer, they're scrambling to find and they've been trained on that system, and now they've got to find a new one. So those are that's one small part of technology. So that's one big area that definitely trips people up. If I were to give you another one, it's certainly the facilities and the timelines. And we've seen, and it's interesting, Jim, we've been dealing with this for almost 30 years now. And to this day, you still have to coach and help people understand that whatever the timeline is, you need to double that probably in terms of completing the construction on the facilities or upgrades, whatever it might be. And does it happen to everyone? No, but the majority of startups I've seen have found that a challenge.
Well, and with COVID and then the tariffs, the supply line and the price is changed and lengthened. So it's even more complicated than it used to be.
Exactly. It's really costs have dramatically been driven up, and people just are, if you don't have solid financing and facilities plans when you're in that application stage with the authorizer, that can be an incredible sticker shock when you actually have your charter approved and now go out to get financing and get the approvals.
Yeah, it was interesting doing some of the work when I was at a prior authorizer, and I was working hand in hand with like the Department of Transportation, the realtors and developers. And one day they sat me down. Now, granted, we had had some issues, and so they were frustrated with me at this point. But they said, Vashanta, in construction world, like we don't operate on a school year. And that was something that I took and I said, that was actually critical feedback and a gift to me. And so I had to start thinking, hey, my school year timeline is on a different path than a construction timeline. So how do I use that to backwards map, right, what my plan should look like and build in contingencies? And so I thought that was really interesting. So we are believers in research. You guys were talking about some research earlier. And I was speaking with a colleague recently who said, hey, we've been doing a lot of research and we are finding that there are two things that make or break a school. It is the leader and it is the teaching staff. And so I wanted to kind of bring that up and pick your brain a little bit about what does strong school leadership really look like at startup?
Good question, and as many people have looked at that question, will tell you it's not for everyone, and there are different types of leaders. So, for example, if you have a school that's been operating for quite some time but is struggling, you probably don't want a startup leader. You want somebody who's really focused on turning around a struggling organization, and that is a different skill set. It can be a different skill set from the energy, the entrepreneurial mindset of whatever it takes to start up a school and rally and really lead through that strong vision and mission that the founding team has. Now, the other part of that is often those visionary entrepreneurial leaders aren't that great when it comes to just maintaining a strong operational and to, strong, big operating school. So yes, what do you need? You need a leader who has that kind of energy and capacity to encourage others when things are tough, because things will be tough throughout that startup phase, and to frankly gather the troops, as they say.
Mark John Watt Maxwell talks about the law of attraction and magnetism. And he's got a quote that says something to the effect of ask for a heart before you ask for a hand, or connect with the heart before you ask for a helping hand. Can you talk about how that's impacted your leadership and what you see in successful schools?
Yeah, and I'll take it back to the research that Vishanta mentioned. It's very clear in the research that teachers remain in an organization in a school or leave a school generally because of the leadership. There's people often talk about the pay or the working conditions or the environment, but ultimately, when you talk to teachers, if they've got that the leader who's encouraging them and convincing them that they're having an impact on lives, and that no matter what, they're going to do what it takes to impact those students, those teachers will stick around through the tough times. If you have a leader who doesn't lead with the heart and can't bring those folks along when things are tough, then there's other options out there. As we know that, particularly in the last few years when there were severe teacher shortages, you really learned the value of leading a team effectively from the heart.
So, Mark, you've seen lots of schools open. Tell us about an example of one that really did it right.
I wish there were more of them, Jim, because the other side of it is easier. And it's really interesting, even though, Jim, we've worked with these schools and the types of things we're talking about today around planning and the different aspects and aspects to a plan. Many school startups don't do that, particularly when they move states. They think they've got a plan because it worked in one state, and that doesn't always translate well to another state. However, without mentioning names, I've worked with groups that really embrace the idea that they've got to seek to understand where they're going, the community they're coming into, the stakeholders they'll be working with, frankly the regulatory authorities that will have some levers over them, and they really take the time to build the relationships first. And those are the schools that succeed at startup. Because again, we've talked about this a few times, when times get tough, you want to be able to pick up the phone or send an email and say, I need help. And generally, if you've done that groundwork in building the relationships in the community and with your authorizer and with the local agencies, perhaps your Department of Education, you're going to have a much more successful start.
That's actually a really good point that you're making. And I'm reflecting on my own first school start experience as an operations director. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know who you don't know. And so one of my questions is like, if you are surrounded by authorizers, support organizations, or even a management company, how can those groups really offer real help without overstepping the school leader?
Well, I would say one of the key things, and I'm seeing this in Jim, I was thinking again about successful startups. It's where those people that you mentioned, Vashanta, have the understanding that they should build out the timeline, at least in the broadest terms, for the startups and make it as long as possible. I'm working right now with a group that's got over 2 years from getting their charter to when they open the doors. And a lot of people think, well, 2 years, that, we don't need 2 years to start up school. Yeah, 2 years should probably be the minimum, and longer is better. And if you can also allow for funding streams, to allow for hiring of staff, because those volunteer board members who are the initial people involved generally won't have the time or the energy to continually give time, and they need to be able to have staff to support them through that startup phase. So again, whether it's the grant makers, the authorizers, the local agencies, make sure the timeline is long enough to allow for all those things we've been talking about that definitely will go wrong as you're in the startup phase.
Mark, you've seen charters from about every angle there is. I try and make a point that there's a difference between learning and running schools. And when you think about running schools, it's the facilities, it's the finance, the student information systems, the state and federal reporting, the charter contract, et cetera, right? All of the stuff of running an institution. And then there's the art and the science of learning, right? That interaction there. If you're a startup school, how do you think about those two things? And how do you leverage your management organization, your authorizer, other groups in those? And where do they plug in best at?
Well, some of the most successful schools that I've seen, both startup and just operationally, have what is not generally thought of as an effective structure. And they have two leaders who can work really effectively in their lanes, an operations leader and an academic leader. And in most schools, you'll find that superintendent or head of school or academic leader is in name or perception the leader of the school. Yet operationally, they have a partner who understands what to do to support that academic leader and keep them out of the nitty gritty that we just talked about, and ensure that all those operations are running smoothly to support the academic operations. And often, again, I would say a pitfall is that boards or management groups don't value that as much as they should, and try and put too much on the academic school leader, where really two people having lots of responsibility is, I would say, necessary in a highly effective school. And I've worked in schools like that, and I've worked with schools that have that model, and that's very helpful to have an extremely strong operations leader that's almost co-equal to your academic leader.
Shout out to all the operations team members out there. That's my personal background. I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for the work that they do. And Mark, I 100% agree. I feel like I had tons that I needed to do operationally. I cannot imagine an academic leader trying to do both of those. That just seems a bit much.
Exactly. And again, I've been in that position where it's been put on me. And what happens is you're spread too thin, and you can't be successful in all those different areas, both getting the program up and running and dealing with parents and dealing with students and dealing with teachers and bringing them all along, and making sure that the bus schedule is all set up.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
I've heard that the most dangerous place in a school is the parking lot.
You're absolutely right, Jim. And school startup folks should know that and spend much, much more time than they ever imagined planning safe pickup and drop off. We could talk a lot about general risk management at a charter school, and I think in a future episode we should talk about really all the different areas of risk management. But at startup, spend hours, days, practice it and have drills and get that pick up and drop off uh, ready to roll on day one so that there's never a chance that any student or any adult will be injured in the process of trying to attend your beautiful new school.
And if you're going to need a stoplight, you better get after that process because zoning and ordinance issues and the support for those take time.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Mark, I'm interested. So I was an ops leader, right? And you're a school leader, a principal. And one of the things I told my network leaders that I knew they were ready when I could walk in the doors before the children got there and I could ask them to execute any process and they could do it. So what do I mean by that? I should be able to walk in and say, I hit that fire drill button and I'm just going to wait and see what happens. A school that's ready has already practiced it. Their teachers know where they're going. There's clear evidence of that procedure. And so that was my test with my staff, like my operations leaders at other schools, when I walked in 2 days before the kids were ready to come in to see if they truly could handle all of the operational components. So when you think about that readiness check, what were some of the things you did as a leader to get a gauge of if your school was really ready to open?
Sure. And I will tell you that I didn't do this initially, and now I, say it should be a non-negotiable that the team that are going to operate the school be there. I generally say at least a month before opening day, and I mean the whole team. And people are often shocked because in the traditional world, people think, oh, teachers and staff come back a week before school starts and they do a little of this, and you actually see that in their planning calendars. And I'm like, no, a month, and then we negotiate 2 weeks, 3 weeks. A month is, I would say, the minimum that you should have your team there practicing those routines and develop. Well, it's not often they have to be developed in the first place and then practiced. And 1 week of moving chairs around and filling out paperwork for HR, which often happens in that week before school, is not going to cut it. So absolutely build in as much time to have the new team there learning the routines, learning the curriculum, learning to pick up and drop off.
Mark, you are saying something I want to highlight. Team. Lots of schools view the employees as like independent contractors. And you're talking about a team. That's critical.
Absolutely. Vishanta mentioned fire drills. And again, teachers aren't in the fire department, but if you've ever seen a good team at a school execute a fire drill well and under time, you give them 90 seconds and they got it done in 80 and they're proud of it. And, they're all cheering and working together. It's a beautiful thing. It can really be fun.
My youngest daughter goes to a charter school, and I have a new standard of how I view schools. And that is when I pull up in the morning, are the adults outside greeting the students, welcoming them in? And I'll tell you, there's science behind it, but when you see that in operation, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And that sometimes that leader is not just greeting, sometimes they're moving around pylons and helping with the pickup and drop off and really leading the way in that sense as well.
But it speaks to the art and the science, right? So one of the pieces of evidence of seeing the staff out helping with Carline is that you are so prepared that it's okay for you to be outside greeting students, helping them to have a very strong start to their day, because you know that once you walk back in the building, you're ready to go. So I love that we're calling that out as a sign of readiness as well.
And Vishanta, it's also customer service, right? Parents are busy. They're dropping their kids off. They're trying to get to work or other things, right? They don't want a chaotic pick up and drop off every morning. They want something smooth, efficient, predictable.
And again, back to the startup part of this, you're also thinking about enrollment. You don't want the reputation of that, zoo down there where they can't even get the cars through the parking lot. You want to have the reputation of this extremely well-oiled machine that's doing things extremely efficiently and well for the students. So reputation matters. And a lot of the community will see what's happening for, that half hour of pick up and drop off at the beginning and end of the day.
Yeah, I'll share one more piece. I know we got to move on. Academically, I had a very privileged opportunity to follow a tier 1 school leaders, what we ended up being after our first 3 years. The other sign of readiness that I learned from her was that she said I should be able to walk in and do a teacher evaluation in the first week of school and the teacher not freak out. And what she meant by that is they had done so much work on the curriculum, lesson planning, procedures, that the teacher should feel really comfortable based on all the work from the summer to walk into their coaching and their feedback cycles with their leaders the first week of school. And I thought I would be the first one to say I gave pushback on that. I was like, let them get settled. They got to start routines. Yeah. But I learned a lot from her, and that she had a very high bar for all of us. And we were able to meet it. And that school ended up being very successful in the first 3 years.
Bashana, what's awesome about that is you can affirm people, right? Give them confidence and encouragement. But, we talk about continuous improvement. We iterate, right? We learn, we grow. That's all part of feedback loops. They're not critical evaluation. They're necessary for human growth.
And Vashanta, I like you calling out that leader that you learned from. So much of what I learned was also from effective leaders. And I remember as a teacher receiving those evaluations early in my career. And sometimes I still, when I coach leaders, I say, if you can, handwrite it. Handwrite the first evaluation. That it's a small thing, but giving them, and when I mean, I don't, of course, there's formal evaluation tools. I mean, just giving the teacher a little written feedback, invaluable, especially if you've got new teachers. Ideally, starting off positive.
Innovation is really big right now in the education space. So a lot of folks are pushing those of us who work in these spaces to really consider the students and families that are here today and what their lives will look like 50 years from now. And so as we think about that, what are some of the things that you believe authorizers and startup schools should really be considering as we move into the future?
Well, part of that movement, Vashanta, are, sometimes they call them micro schools, and small schools are part of that changing environment that we're in. And I'm very excited about it. I love the idea of small communities. It's unfortunate, small school communities, 100, give or take 50. And I mean some really small schools, and I think those are wonderful, but we don't see many of them in the public education world, either charter or otherwise, because financially it's such a challenge to operate a school that's 100 or less students. So what I see is, coming, or hopefully that we're building, are networks to support the small schools. So hubs that can take some of those operational back office things that we mentioned to support a number of small schools. And we're seeing that. We're seeing entities, private organizations in different parts of the state that, or rather country, that take on those operational activities and support smaller schools. And I think that's a really exciting movement. And it should allow charters to continue to be competitive as we move into an environment where they're, the ESAs or the vouchers and the permissionless schools, as they're being often referred to.
Mark, if you could wave a magic wand and redo how charter schools launch, what would you do?
Right along the lines of what we were just mentioning, Jim, start small. Far too often we've seen schools at startup determine the enrollment they require based on a lot of financial factors, which are real. They have to have a facility. They have to be able to afford it. They have to afford staff. Yet, I think many across the country, some of the most successful schools that are still in existence started in places where they were able to start with 1 grade or 2 grades and grow organically. So if I had a magic wand, I would definitely start every charter school as small as feasible, and then just grow in a way that focuses on quality rather than quantity or filling seats. So that would be one of my magic wands. And the other would be what we already discussed, which is ensuring the resources are there to have a team employed prior to, as long as possible, a year and a half prior to opening day, so they can engage in all those activities that we referred to.
So there's all sorts of groups, right? National Charter School Institute being one of them. We're trying to make startup easier. Simon Sinek's now talking about the value of the struggle. How do you rectify us trying to make it easier in the value of the struggle?
I don't know that because I wouldn't say that we can make it easier. I would suggest that school startup is difficult and will remain difficult for the foreseeable future. I think that struggle will remain. What we want to do is put the pieces in place that provide, buffers and safety nets, and ensuring that, those, when things go wrong, that there's someone there to support the startup. entity and ensure its success into the future. And ensure is a strong word, but do your absolute best to support them towards success. It won't be easy, and that's frankly that's part of the fun. I get why Simon Sinek says that, because it's the other way of looking at it is type 2 fun. It's not necessarily, it's not life endangering, but it is quite difficult and stressful. But then after the fact, you look back on it and realize, how much you learned from that experience and grew from that experience. So I hope that remains in school startup, and I think it will. But let's give them more support in the front end.
Well, Jim said something the other day, and this is coming up for me. I have a lot of passion around this topic. And I think the words that you used, Jim, were like, if I've already watched somebody else struggle in a particular way, why would I let the next person have that same struggle? So I think I'd want to push on that and say, I believe like in my day when we were doing school startup, like there wasn't a playbook, but now there are. So in that sense, in terms of being able to help folks with readiness, and anticipate what potential challenges can come up. I do believe nationally, we've started to do some of that work and we can do more of it. And then I'm balancing that with your context is always going to bring something nuanced. And so I think contextual struggle will always remain. And I don't know if we ever let that piece go. But I do believe there's something to be said about learning from schools that have started up before and like sharing those playbooks. And that's my personal kind of push nationally. Sometimes we want to hold on to that stuff, to our own brand and our own network. But for me, from a national perspective, we can push the collective needle further if we share that knowledge more widely and more collectively.
And that's why we're bold by choice, because
That's
we
right.
want to open this path and not just be a narrow one where a few people know how to navigate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives me so much pleasure to be able to share the experiences we've had with startup and actually help new startups avoid some of those things that we didn't know. And there was so much we didn't know 30 years ago that we know today, and ensuring that that knowledge is kept and shared, and the future generations of school startup benefit from it, as well as struggle through it.
So, Mark, I'm going to ask you to put your authorizer hat on. You authorize an application. They're in year zero, right? The startup year. And you have to make a decision. Are they ready to open? How does ready to open from an authorizer look compared to ready to open as the school leader?
Yes, from the authorizer side, it is all the basic things you'd think of when you're thinking of an agency that's regulating another agency, and they have to have a checklist. They have to ensure that school is a safe place for students to enter. They have to ensure that it's appropriately staffed by people who have the correct credentials. It sounds bureaucratic. It's absolutely necessary to ensure that those public dollars are well stewarded, and the environment that families are bringing their students to is one where they'll learn and thrive. And without those background things in place, people who've been around this for 20, 30 years know that they're unlikely to succeed. So you want to have that checklist of known pre-opening success indicators. And fortunately they exist from all these experiences we've talked about. They've been developed by folks in the charter world.
Well, I'm going to make a bold by choice statement. We're home of Epicenter. It works with 3,500 plus charter schools across the country. We are going to build startup year zero stuff right into Epicenter and give that as a gift to the charter school community.
Jim, I think that's a great idea. I personally actually used it in the startup phase, where a authorizer was able to essentially give their school access to it long before they opened their doors, and they started collecting and using it as a way to hold each other accountable and responsible to ensure all the things were checked off.
So, Mark, take us to the finish line. If you were to give founders of schools one piece of wisdom that you've gained over the years, what's the one thing?
Keep the eye as far into the future as you can and set that vision. Whether it's we are going to, be the greatest performing arts school in this community that's delivering for our families, whatever the vision is, keep your eye on that vision and communicate it and over communicate it to your team, because it's that team that's going to get you there. If you're
Prashant, I just heard him say you hang the North Star and you march towards it.
That's right.
exactly.
Well, Mark, these were gifts, and we are grateful to you that you were able to come in today, get through our challenges that we experienced on this day, and really share with us your knowledge, your expertise, and your insights. We're incredibly grateful to you. It's deeply rooted, like I can feel your passion. It's deeply rooted in making sure that children, students, get the intended result. We've been talking about that as the promise, right? And so from what I heard today is charters are promises. They're promises to schools, to communities, to parents, to families, but most of all to students. And one way in which school leaders can shepherd that promise really well is to be really well prepared. And so take advantage of all of your resources, reach out, find those checklists, build upon those checklists, and do everything you can to anticipate what's coming up, knowing that you'll have to contingency plan as well. So a quick preview, family, next time we're headed right into those school building doors. Literally, we're going to be talking about once the school is open, parents are driving up to that carpool line and children are walking into the building. That's where the teaching, the learning, and the leadership begin. So stay with us and tune in next week.
So I've got a challenge for our listeners. First, think about a new school. How can you support it? Because we're part of an ecosystem. Two, we want you to share the Bold by Choice podcast with others. We want everybody to have access to the tools and information they need to succeed. And three, if you have not joined our charter network, you're invited. And we want you to be part of the community that is building hope and possibility and proving the promise. Let's go.
So family, if you've been hanging out with us, but you haven't committed, go ahead and hit subscribe, follow us, leave us a review, and we'll see you next time on the Bold by Choice podcast, where leadership, innovation, and impact come to life.